Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you can leave a like and a follow for more content like this.
Chapter 1. The Twins of Storm's End. Westeros, 280 AC. The Castle of Storm's End, seat of House Baratheon, rulers of the Stormlands. Stannis Baratheon, at 7 and 10 name days, sat rigidly in the Lord's chair within the Great Hall of Storm's End. His short, black hair was neatly trimmed, his broad shoulders and muscular build exuding strength. His face, however, was impassive, devoid of any trace of emotion, his features set in a perpetual expression of grim determination. The room was alive with conversation as the vassals and stewards of the Stormlands debated the details of an upcoming tournament to be held at Storm's End. Stannis spoke sparingly, only intervening to make decisions when critical matters arose, his words brooking no argument or compromise. A report from one of the guards had interrupted earlier proceedings. His youngest brother, Renly Baratheon, had once again eaten something unsuitable and was suffering from severe vomiting and diarrhea. When Maester Cresson, having attended to the matter, returned to the hall with a calm smile, he announced, "The boy is fine now. He's emptied his stomach thoroughly and just needs a hearty supper." Stannis acknowledged the Maester with a curt nod and returned to listening to the ongoing discussions, his stern face betraying no thoughts. In 278 AC, their mother, Lady Cassana Estermont, had given birth to twin boys. Not long after, she was ordered to set sail with their father, Lord Steffon Baratheon, on a mission to find a bride for Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. For centuries, the Targaryen royal family had maintained a tradition of intermarriage to preserve the purity of their Valyrian bloodline. However, by the time Prince Rhaegar had come of age at 6 and 10 name days, no suitable relative was available. Desperate, King Aerys II, Targaryen, the Mad King, sent emissaries across Essos to search for a Valyrian-descended bride, where some silver-haired, purple-eyed descendants of old Valyria were rumored to remain. Tragedy struck on their return voyage when their ship was caught in a storm and sank. A passing merchant vessel later found a bedraggled fool clinging to a piece of driftwood, delivering the grim news of the Baratheon couple's fate. The eldest son, Robert Baratheon, had been fostered in the Vale at the Eyrie under Lord Jon Arryn. At 6 and 10 name days, Robert inherited the titles of Lord of Storm's End and Warden of the Stormlands, but he now spent much of his time traveling across Westeros, participating in tournaments. Jon Arryn had taken both Robert and Eddard Stark of Winterfell as wards. After losing his first wife in childbirth and his second to illness, Jon remained childless, leaving Robert and Eddard as his heirs apparent. With Robert frequently absent, he left the governance of Storm's End and the Stormlands in the capable hands of his younger brother Stannis. At 7 and 10 name days, Stannis was tasked with managing the estate and overseeing their youngest siblings, the twins Renly and Renly Baratheon, both 2.5 name days old. Robert Baratheon, eldest, at 8 and 10 name days. Stannis Baratheon, second born, at 7 and 10 name days. Renly Baratheon, third born, at 2.5 name days, the elder twin. Renly Baratheon, fourth born, at 2.5 name days, the younger twin. This was House Baratheon of Storm's End, Lords of the Stormlands, one of the original 7 kingdoms of Westeros. As for the youngest sibling, Renly, who had not existed in the original histories, he now lay in his freshly cleaned bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Renly, Renly's twin, was yet another addition to the Baratheon lineage. With his black hair and dark eyes, he bore all the hallmarks of his family's features. His future stature and looks were of little concern. For Renly, however, the situation was far more complex. Trapped in the body of a child, his mind remained that of a man in his 20s. Earlier, vomiting publicly in front of the household had been a humiliating ordeal. Should anyone mention it in the future, his only recourse would be to feign childish ignorance. He rolled over in bed, continuing to stare aimlessly, lost in his thoughts. Originally, he had been an ordinary young man from the 21st century. 9 years of compulsory education, university, dating, work, a mortgage for a house and car, time had passed in a regular rhythm. Crossing into another world had never been part of the plan. He'd spent years waiting for the Elder Scrolls 6 after seeing a promotional teaser online. 1 year passed, then another, and still no news. He'd joked that if Bethesda had just typed 20 characters a day, there'd be a file several hundred kilobytes long by now. At this rate, It felt like the game might still be sitting as an empty, new folder on someone's desktop. One day, chatting with a coworker about the endless wait, the colleague mentioned that they were playing the Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, and boasted about having a 160-gigabyte mod collection ready to share. "It's incredible. I'll send you the link," the coworker had said, grinning mischievously. As someone who had always stuck to vanilla games, avoiding mods or cheats, he hesitated. But curiosity won out, and he resolved to give it a try, despite the coworker's sly grin flashing in his mind. His cloud save files were still intact. Selecting an old character, he launched the game, only for everything to go horribly wrong. The moment the game loaded, he felt his soul wrenched from his body and hurtled into a glowing tunnel of light. Time seemed meaningless as he floated endlessly, until finally, the tunnel ended. Everything went dark. When he regained consciousness, he wasn't himself anymore. He was a newborn child. For days, he couldn't do much but observe. The room's furnishings, the people with their colorful hair and medieval clothing, and their incomprehensible language, all pointed to an ancient European setting. His mind buzzed with grand plans. Should he aim to conquer the Americas, or start an industrial revolution and amass wealth? By the time he reached 1 year old, he had learned to walk and speak. Slowly, reality began to take shape. The language spoken was the common tongue, not any European dialect. The castle he called home was Storm's End. His eldest brother, Robert Baratheon, was the lord of this keep. His stern-faced second brother was Stannis Baratheon. Sharing a nursery with him was his twin brother, Renly Baratheon. That was when it hit him. This wasn't medieval Europe. He had been reborn into the world of Game of Thrones. And his name? Right Baratheon. A twin to Renly, a person who hadn't existed in the original history of this world. The realization was jarring. Westeros was a land of knights and honor, but it was equally rife with treachery, poisonings, ambushes, and conspiracies. A low magic world, but high in danger. He recalled watching the Game of Thrones series. The Baratheons, though one of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms and even producing a king, had been a textbook example of self-destruction. By the end, the entire house was wiped out, save for a few bastards. A dangerous legacy indeed. Doing the math, his birthday was the same as Renly's, 278 AC. Robert would die at 6 and 30 name days in 298 AC. Renly would follow in 299 AC at 1 and 20. Stannis' death, while harder to pinpoint, would occur during his northern campaign. That left him with only about 2 decades to live if things played out the same way. The butterfly effect needed to begin flapping its wings, starting now. Like other predecessors of transmigration, he began experimenting with all kinds of methods to uncover a possible golden finger cheat system. A month later, while being held by a maid and stargazing, his golden finger finally activated. The Elder Scrolls. 5. Skyrim System. However, the systems of Skyrim and Westeros had merged into a single entity. What remained were skills, magic, and dragon shouts. Items from the game were nowhere to be found. The rules of the two worlds collided, leaving the game system somewhat incomplete. Still, being born into a noble house with black hair and black eyes, and retaining even a portion of the system, was a great start. He reminded himself that earlier transmigrators had crossed over with nothing but a pair of underwear and had to chew on sweet potatoes to survive. Gratitude was key. Now, back to the present. He shakily climbed out of bed after dinner and insisted that the maid take him to the top of the castle's tower to stargaze. After the afternoon's debacle, the previous maids had been punished, and his new caretakers were far more vigilant, never leaving his side. Storm's End was built on a cliff, dominated by a colossal circular tower that seemed to pierce the sky even from a distance. The tower housed a library, granary, barracks, armory, banquet hall, and countless rooms for the lord and his retainers. At the very top was a rookery for ravens. The structure could shelter over 1,000 people during times of war, though its seaward side had no windows. The outer walls were massive, towering, and smooth. Their width was sufficient for 4 horse-drawn carriages to run side by side. Between the walls and the central tower lay the inner ward, which held stables, kitchens, smithies, training grounds, gardens, and even a secret passage leading to the sea below. Storm's End was one of the Seven Kingdoms' most impenetrable fortresses, its defenses unyielding to all but an adult dragon. When Wright reached the rooftop terrace, the sun was already setting. From the battlements, he looked out. One side of the castle faced its lands, with a road leading from the main gate to a distant horizon. Closer to the fortress, clusters of stone workshops, houses, inns, brothels, taverns, and shops sprawled outward. Workers bustled around an open area where carriages delivered materials for constructing a grand tournament ground and viewing stands. A Baratheon-hosted tourney was a significant event, and preparations, always, began early. The other side of the castle faced Shipbreaker Bay, whose name alone hinted at countless wrecks. But tonight, the waters were calm and the skies clear enough to see the stars. A maid laid a blanket on the ground for the little boy to lie down and stargaze. As Wright gazed at the stars, the system's benefits became apparent. Even incomplete, it granted him a vivid sense of his life force, stamina, and a new awareness of magic within his body. The system's experience mechanics worked like in Skyrim. Skills improved through practice. Every 3 skill upgrades granted a free attribute point, which could either add 10 points to an attribute or enhance a skill level. He focused his magic, but there was no awe-inspiring starry skill tree like in the game, nor were there health, stamina, or magicka bars. Instead, a few sparse lines of text appeared in his mind. Name: Renly Baratheon. Age: 2 years and 4 months. Attributes: adult average 100, health 50, magicka 100, stamina 50. Combat skills: max level 100, one-handed 5, two-handed 5, block 5, archery 5, light armor 5, heavy armor 5, 0. Magic. Skills: destruction 0, restoration 0, alteration 0, conjuration 0, illusion 0, alchemy 4, enchanting 0, life skills: speech 15, lockpicking 5, pickpocket 5, sneak 5, smithing 5, free points 19 talents, Dragonborn, broken item space, magical affinity. The tourney at Storm's End originally occurred in 277 AC to celebrate Robert's 16th name day. For this story's purposes, the timeline has shifted to 280 AC. Chapter 2: Abilities and Magic. Since the system awakened on his first name day, Wright had spent his days dueling with wooden toy armor, swords, and shields against the maids and guards. This playful combat had raised his skills in one-handed, two-handed, block, archery, light armor, and speech. However, all these skills hit a bottleneck at level 5. It seemed the potential of toy weapons had been fully exhausted, and only real equipment would advance his skills further. Smithing. Storm's End had a functioning forge for crafting and maintaining weapons, but the blacksmith and guards barred a child from entering. Tinkering with leather had earned him a few points, but progress was slow. Enchanting. There was no enchanting table in the castle. Alchemy. The incident from the afternoon had boosted his alchemy skill to level 5 after consuming so many bizarre ingredients. Alchemy involved transforming raw materials into special potions through magic at an alchemy table. These potions could restore health, stamina, and magicka, or provide resistances to magic. Some had unique effects, like enabling underwater breathing. As one of the 3 main skills in the original game, Wright placed great importance on alchemy. However, the merged systems of Skyrim and Westeros made it far more difficult to level up. Gaining alchemy experience primarily came from crafting potions. This required raw ingredients and knowledge of their effects. The only way to discover an ingredient's properties was by eating it, which also provided a tiny amount of alchemy experience. He had already sampled ingredients like wheat, silver perch, salt, chicken eggs, honey, and even gnawed on antlers. What others considered food were raw materials for an alchemist. Other ingredients, however, were problematic. Giant's toe? There were giants beyond the wall, but acquiring one would mean defeating a giant, and enduring the experience of tasting something likely unwashed for decades. That would also mean a first-hand encounter with Westeros's version of giant airlines. Then, there were materials like Daedra hearts, Falmer ears, and Nirnroot, items whose origins were impossible to determine in this world. Mushrooms? He dared not risk eating random fungi without more knowledge. And what about imp stool? While the alchemy ingredient in Skyrim was named for a mushroom, the thought of something connected to Tyrion Lannister, the imp of future renown, conjured disturbing images. Consuming anything associated with imp stool would surely ruin his reputation and relationships. For now, alchemy had to wait. The risks of experimentation outweighed the benefits, and alienating those around him wasn't worth it. His focus would shift to other areas, like distributing his accumulated points. Since the system's awakening, Wright had worked tirelessly for over 2 years, managing to save up 19 free points. With no clear guidance or instructions from the system, he had refrained from allocating them, cautiously saving them for when he had a better understanding of the system's mechanics. In this chaotic and dangerous world, survival required high health and robust defenses. Wealthy lords clad themselves in full-plate armor, turning into ironclad fortresses paired with the finest weapons. For the poor, survival meant risking their lives. Without antibiotics, a serious injury was often a death sentence. The only strategy was to ensure the other person died first. Wright allocated his free points evenly across health, stamina, and magicka, 5 points each. With each free point granting 10 attribute points, the results were immediate. His body heated up and turned slightly red before returning to normal within a minute. The maid fanned herself, unaware of the extraordinary changes occurring. Wright, however, could feel it clearly. His vitality surged, his stamina grew, and his magicka reserves increased. The doubling of his attributes was undeniably noticeable. Physically, his not-yet 3-year-old body already showed hints of developed muscles. Though not obvious to the eye, his strength was now comparable to an adult's. With continued point allocation, surpassing human limits was only a matter of time. I can't believe my body is already approaching adult levels. This is absurd. But then again, as a Dragonborn, my enemies include mages, monsters, and even dragons. Being superhuman is a necessity when facing such foes. It makes sense. Once you step into the realm of the extraordinary, your adversaries will be equally extraordinary. According to the system's rules, the total number of free points he could earn was capped. With 18 skills maxed out at level 100, he'd have 600 free points in total. Dividing these evenly among the 3 attributes would give 200 points per attribute, resulting in a total of 2,000 for each. Even at this peak, his physical attributes would be 20 times greater than the average adult. Impressive, but perhaps still inadequate against a dragon. With his attributes boosted, Wright saved the remaining 4 points. The world was far more complex and realistic than a game, so he decided to explore his system gradually rather than rush into decisions. Next, he accessed the broken item space, a remnant from the original game. Upon his first attempt to open it, all the weapons, armor, and materials had disintegrated into powder, leaving nothing but a few books scattered in disarray. Everything else had vanished in the wind. Now, as he rummaged through the space, it felt like opening blind boxes. Today, he retrieved 2 books: Tragedy in Black and Alteration Spellbook, Candlelight. He recalled how, in the original game, learning spells required reading books. Moreover, reading books also contributed to skill leveling. Since he was still young and physically limited, studying seemed like the most logical course of action. Finally, he turned his attention to the Dragonborn option. All the dragon shouts were currently grayed out, inaccessible. His consciousness was bombarded with a cacophony of deep, indecipherable voices, growing louder and more potent the longer he lingered. These mysterious words carried an almost hypnotic allure, their power and temptation growing with every passing moment. Wright quickly exited the consciousness space, realizing that the dragon shouts in the Dragonborn section were far more complex than the game's simple point allocation system. The words in that space were imbued with magical knowledge passed down from dragons, knowledge he could neither comprehend nor decipher at present. In the underground storeroom of Storm's End, a glowing orb the size of a fist hovered around Wright, illuminating the entire area. This was the result of mastering the candlelight spell. Unlike in the game, where a single click learned the spell, the merged systems of Tamriel and Westeros made spell acquisition a much more rigorous process. The spellbook was filled with detailed explanations of the principles behind the spell, the flow of magic, and the precise rules for its release. It required constant practice based on the book's instructions. Only today did he finally manage to cast his first spell successfully. Wright's excitement was soon tempered by a significant issue. His magicka regeneration was excruciatingly slow. Even this beginner-level spell drained his magicka so much that it would take several days to recover. Without access to restorative potions, his only option was to wait for the return of dragons and magic to Westeros, which might naturally accelerate magicka regeneration. For now, he resolved to repeatedly deplete his magicka and allow it to recover, gradually increasing his magical proficiency through sustained practice. He also realized an intriguing possibility. If he gave the Candlelight spellbook to another person with magicka, could they learn and cast the spell by understanding its contents? Meanwhile, he finished reading The Tragedy in Black, which increased his enchanting skill by 1 level. He opened his system panel to review his progress. Name: Renly Baratheon. Age: 2 years and 4 months. Attributes: Health: 100, Magicka: 150, Stamina: 100, Physical skills: one-handed: 5, two-handed: 5 block, 5 archery, 5 light armor, 5 heavy armor, 0 shield, 0. Magical skills: destruction: 0 restoration, 0 alteration, 1. Conjuration: 0 illusion, 0 alchemy, 0 4. Enchanting: 1 life skills, speechcraft: 15, lockpicking, 5 pickpocketing, 5 smithing, 5 free. Points: 4 talents, Dragonborn, shattered item space, magic affinity. It seemed the world wasn't entirely without hope. Every skill had a pathway to improvement, especially magic-related ones, which demanded understanding their underlying principles. Given his young age and current limitations, Wright decided to focus on acquiring knowledge as the foundation for his growth. Chapter 3. Robert's Return. Upon leaving the underground storeroom, Wright noticed the servants hurriedly packing and organizing things. He stopped one of them to ask what was happening, and the servant explained that the guards at the tower had spotted a large group approaching, with a banner at the forefront displaying a golden crown stag on a black field. Lord Robert Baratheon had returned. Wright rushed to the top of the gatehouse, where Maester Cresson and Renly already arrived. After greeting them, Maester Cresson began pointing out the various house banners in the distance, introducing the crests and key figures of each noble house to Renly. Recognizing these banners and individuals was a vital part of noble education. At the front of the procession, Robert rode ahead on horseback, his banner proudly displayed in the flag-bearers behind him. The gold and black stag banner was unmistakable and could be seen throughout the castle. To Robert's left is a silver-haired young man, followed by 2 knights in white robes, Maester Cresson explained. The silver-haired youth is Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. His house banner is a black field with 3 red dragons, symbolizing the royal family. Your father, King Aerys, and Lord Tywin all grew up together, fighting side by side as close friends. To Robert's right is Oberyn Martell, Prince of Dorne. His house banner is a golden spear through a red sun. He killed a member of House Iroh Wood, which forced Prince Doran Martell's son, Quentyn, to serve as a squire for Iroh Wood. As a result, Oberyn was exiled, only allowed to return to Dorne during particularly important events. Behind the prince, you'll see 2 knights in white cloaks, Sir Barristan Selmy and Sir Arthur Dayne. Both are members of the Kingsguard, sworn to serve the king without land, wives, or children. They bear no house banners, as their allegiance lies solely with the crown. Further back is John Connington, a young man who serves as Rhaegar's squire. Though squires typically do not bear banners, Jon's house, the Connington, is represented by a red and white griffin banner, signaling his involvement in the upcoming tournament. Robert is followed by Eddard Stark, the second son of Lord Rickard Stark, the Warden of the North. His house banner is a white field with a gray direwolf. And finally, there's Elbert Arryn, the nephew and heir of Lord Jon Arryn, the Lord of the Vale. His house banner is a blue field with a white moon and eagle. Robert, Eddard, and Elbert are all lifelong friends, having grown up together in the Eyrie. Meister Cressin took the cup of water handed to him by a maid, taking a sip before continuing. House Selmy of Harvest Hall and House Connington of Griffin's Roost are both vassals of the Stormlands, sworn to House Baratheon. House Dane, Lords of Dorne, are vassals of House Martell. The finest warrior of their house is given the ancestral sword, Dawn, and is granted the title of Sword of the Morning, a knightly honor unique to their house. Wright watched the procession as the riders quickly passed through the town and arrived at the castle gatehouse. Robert, Rhaegar, and Oberyn led the way, with Eddard, Elbert, Barristan, Arthur, Jon, and others following behind, laughing and talking as Robert boomed greetings to everyone. From the gatehouse, Wright shouted, "Robert, my brother!" Robert looked up and shouted back loudly as the guests in the procession finished the bread and salt, prepared by Stannis at the hall entrance, laughing as they entered the castle. This was Robert's first tournament as the Lord of the Stormlands. He and his close friend Eddard Stark had traveled south from the Eyrie, passing through King's Landing where they invited Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Prince Oberyn Martell to join them. Oberyn's sister was married to Rhaegar, and both were enthusiasts of martial arts, so they decided to come ahead with Robert. Where Robert went, feasts followed. Robert loved fighting, drinking, eating meat, and womanizing. If you shared these passions, you were a good friend. Dealing with Robert was simple and comfortable, but when it came to matters of governance, forget it. He preferred to be the hands-off ruler. As the host, Robert's rule was clear. When he was present, everyone had to sit down and drink with him. At the long table sat Robert, Stannis, Prince Rhaegar, the Red Viper Oberyn, Eddard Stark, Elbert Arryn, heir to the Eyrie, Barristan Selmy, Jon Connington, future Hand of the King, Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, and his sister Ashara Dane. At the end of the table were Renly and Wright. Wright had the opportunity to get a closer look at Prince Rhaegar, a man of towering stature with the Targaryen family's distinctive silver hair and purple eyes. Handsome with a melancholy expression, his royal status only added to his allure, easily captivating many young women. It was precisely because of this that Rhaegar's relationships with women had caused turmoil in the original timeline, eventually leading to Robert's rebellion. But here, Rhaegar and Robert sat across from each other, laughing, eating meat, and drinking together. As the alcohol flowed, the conversation became more lively, moving from small talk to the subject of women. After Robert belted out a drunken rendition of "The Bear and the Maiden Fair," he took a large gulp of wine and turned to Prince Rhaegar. "My fiancée, Lyanna Stark, she and I have known each other since we were children. She's incredibly beautiful, just and brave." "I've never met Lyanna Stark. Is she Eddard's sister?" Prince Rhaegar asked. At this, everyone turned to look at Eddard Stark's less than handsome face. Except for Elbert, the others who hadn't met Lyanna exchanged skeptical smiles. Prince Rhaegar responded, "Everyone thinks the person they love is the most beautiful, and they won't accept any contradiction. But in my opinion, the most beautiful person is the child I am about to have." When Robert heard the conversation turn to children, a topic he found dull, he quickly tried to shake off the wine's effects. "As for worthy opponents aside from all of you here, there's Brandon Stark and Jorah Mormont in the north. I've had some good matches with those two." Prince Rhaegar continued, "In the Westerlands, there's Jaime Lannister. At just 14, his horsemanship and martial skills are extraordinary." The Red Viper, Oberyn, thought for a moment, but didn't object. He added, "And there's also Sir Gregor Clegane from House Lannister. His unnatural strength makes him a formidable opponent." The conversation continued, with various members adding names of other skilled warriors, recounting battles and tournaments where they had witnessed remarkable feats. They argued passionately, each telling tales of who had been unseated by whom and who had chased another across the lists. The wine flowed freely, and while the older generation of warriors wasn't present, the younger ones had no care for their stories. Meanwhile, Stannis and the slightly older Barristan Selmy discussed the current hand, Tywin Lannister. Tywin, the king, and my father have been friends since childhood, Stannis began. Tywin has been hand of the king for 20 years, settling financial disputes with Braavos, abolishing many laws that had restricted the nobility, reducing taxes in the major cities, improving roads, bolstering trade, punishing corruption, quelling the rebellion in the Vale, and he's also been a strong advocate of tournaments. He should make a decent profit from the merchants' taxes collected for this tournament. A little tipsy, Stannis nodded, adding, "There's been some smuggling in the lands lately. If I catch the ones responsible, I'll cut off their fingers." Robert, not wanting to discuss politics at the feast, quickly changed the subject and asked where everyone would go after the tournament. Prince Rhaegar replied that he and Oberyn would head west, with Rhaegar going to Summerhall and Oberyn returning to Dorne. Wright and Renly, the two children, could only watch as the adults bantered. Wright then turned his attention to Eddard Stark. Eddard Stark wasn't handsome with his long face, but he had a kind demeanor. With dark brown hair and gray eyes, while others were chatting and laughing, he occasionally stole glances at Sir Arthur Dayne's sister, Ashara Dayne. Ashara was tall, with fair skin, dark hair, and mesmerizing purple eyes. Whenever Ashara turned to look at him, Eddard quickly shifted his gaze elsewhere. The future honorable and shy Lord of Winterfell was, at this moment, a bashful young man. As Wright ate, watching the drunken conversations unfold, he thought, "These are the famous characters from the original story. Now they're all in their teens or early 20s, living their youth, eating, drinking, and laughing freely. But next year, the tournament at Harrenhal will be the starting point. And after the Mad King's madness, they'll all become enemies, some dying, others fleeing. Fate is a cruel thing." He sighed to himself, realizing that he was still under 3 years old, insignificant, unsure of whether he would bring any changes to the future. The Storm's End castle was vast, and after the meal, Stannis arranged for the group and their followers to stay in the castle. Only Robert and Oberyn, in high spirits, headed off to a brothel. With so many skilled fighters around, Wright didn't want to miss out. During the day, he watched them train. Robert with his war hammer, Oberyn with his spear techniques, Arthur Dayne with his swordsmanship, and the others displaying their martial skills. He learned a lot, and even practiced alongside them with a toy sword for a few days, improving his proficiency with both single and double-handed weapons, as well as blocking. He even tried to wield Arthur Dayne's legendary family sword, Dawn, for a moment. Though it was far too heavy for him, and he could hardly make a move, just standing with it raised earned gasps of admiration. Through his knowledge of forging and enchantment skills, he could tell the sword was crafted from fallen star metal, with a white, gleaming blade that was strong enough to rival Valyrian steel, though it had no magical properties. Everyone praised Wright for training alongside them at such a young age, predicting that he would grow into a great knight with limitless potential. Robert laughed heartily, proud of their words, though his gaze toward Wright carried a hint of regret. If only Robert weren't the fourth born. As the tournament at Storm's End Castle drew nearer, the jousting fields and stands outside the castle were nearly ready. The tents set up by the surrounding merchants almost doubled the size of the nearby town. Many luxurious tents belonging to nobles from all over had been erected, complete with carpets, furniture, food, and wine. These nobles came to participate, trade goods, and form connections. Storm's End. Castle had become more and more lively. Chapter 4. Gathering at Storm's End. Castle nobles from all over continued to arrive, but first, they all made their way to the castle to greet Robert and make connections, before hanging up their banners with their house crests in the castle hall. Wright noticed Stannis busy with preparations and casually remarked, "There are more people than expected. We could expand the jousting stands to make a bit more money." Stannis paused, thought for a moment, and without turning his head, replied, "I'll go take a look," and walked away. Wright often found himself suggesting ideas for the tournament based on his past experiences, though he wasn't sure if Stannis would take any of it seriously. After all, he was still very young, and with Stannis' personality, directly offering advice would probably result in a scowl of annoyance. What does a 3-year-old know? Renly had disappeared somewhere, and Wright returned to his room. He cast a light spell to drain his magical energy, and after a few days of practice, his skill with alteration magic was gradually improving. There was a knock at the door, and a servant came to inform him that his uncle's family had arrived. Heading to the hall, he found Robert, Stannis, and Renly already there. His mother was from House Estermont, one of their vassals, and their domain was Greenstone Keep on Estermont Island. Since it was an island, the family controlled many ships, both warships and merchant vessels. Arriving by boat were his uncle Eldon Estermont, the head of the house, along with his second uncle, Sir Lomas Estermont, and his cousins, Aemon Estermont and Andrew Estermont. Their family banner had already been hung, green with a large green turtle on it, which was somewhat difficult to describe. After exchanging a few words with his uncles, Wright started chatting with his cousins when a guard outside came to announce, "The Lord of Old Town, Leighton Hightower, the Lord of Horn Hill, Randall Tarley, and the Lord of Seaguard, Jason Mallister, have arrived." Robert quickly apologized to his uncles and asked Stannis to escort them to their rooms while he continued to greet the guests. Hearing a familiar name, Wright couldn't help but be curious when he heard the name of Randall Tarley. It was the future father of the first man to kill a White Walker in 8,000 years, Samwell Tarley. Wright turned toward the hall doors. A group of people entered, with the 3 lords at the front, followed by their families and attendants. He didn't recognize them right away, but after hearing Robert greet them, he knew who was who. Randall Tarley had a stern expression, a small beard, and his hairline was starting to recede. As the group approached, Wright felt a stronger magical aura. As Robert invited them to sit, and they began exchanging pleasantries, Wright, feeling bold because of his youth, moved closer. The magical aura was emanating from Randall's attendant, who was holding a massive 2-handed sword, Valyrian steel, the legendary Heartsbane. It was Wright's first time seeing a magical artifact, and to make matters even more enticing, it was a Valyrian steel weapon, one of the most legendary materials in Westeros. Unable to resist, he awkwardly asked, "Lord Tarley, may I touch your sword?" Randall turned around to respond, but before he could say anything, Robert shouted at Wright, "Don't be rude, that's Lord Randall's family heirloom." He then turned to Randall and said, "This is my youngest brother, Renly Baratheon, not yet 3 years old. He's been practicing swordsmanship with us recently. We've spoken about the legendary swords of our time, and this little fellow can certainly tell the quality of a sword. He immediately recognized that your sword, Lord Randall, is something special." With this remark, Robert not only reprimanded his brother for his rudeness, but also emphasized his identity, praised his diligent training and intelligence, and subtly flattered Randall's legendary sword, expertly gauging Randall's personality. Randall, though not particularly skilled in combat, was known for his martial spirit, bravery in battle, and honorable character. In the original story, he was the one who dealt Robert his only defeat during the rebellion at the Battle of the Ashford. Loyal beyond measure, Randall had remained steadfast in his allegiance to House Tyrell, despite his radical views on child-rearing, believing that sons should only become warriors. Randall looked at Wright and asked, "This is a 2-handed greatsword. Can you lift it?" Wright, sensing an opportunity, quickly responded, "I can lift Dawn." Upon hearing this, Randall signaled for one of his guards to bring the sword. The guard carefully handed the massive blade to Wright, gripping the hilt and presenting it to him. The hilt and cross-guard of Heart's Banner were adorned with intricate patterns. As Wright grasped the hilt and slowly pulled the sword free from its scabbard, the blade revealed a faint, dark hue, rippling with a smoky-like aura. Through his knowledge of smithing and enchantment, Wright recognized that the blade was forged with a folding technique similar to Damascus steel. Holding it in both hands and swinging it a few times, he felt that it was much lighter than Dawn, and the surrounding onlookers couldn't help but murmur in admiration. If Randall is going to teach Samwell Tarly a lesson one day, I might just end up being the son he refers to, Wright thought with a smile as he returned the sword to its scabbard. As he lightly ran his other hand along the blade, he instantly sensed the materials used. Skyforge steel 4/6, flawless grinding craftsmanship, and a purification enchantment, which returned undead to their original world. The Valyrian steel sword reminded him of the crafting and enchantment system in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Could it be that he would be able to forge Valyrian steel weapons in the future? Furthermore, as Martin had mentioned, Valyrian steel wasn't mined, but was crafted by repeatedly folding and refining iron to remove impurities, infused with magic. After thanking Lord Randall for his generosity, Wright returned to his room, thinking about how he could improve his own smithing skills. He recalled a blacksmith in the castle named Donal Noy, who had crafted Robert's warhammer and Stannis' first sword. Later, during the War of the Usurper, Donal had been wounded in his arm. After an untreated infection led to the amputation of his left hand, he had joined the Night's Watch and continued his work as a blacksmith, eventually becoming acquainted with Jon Snow. Robert's warhammer had been powerful enough to crush Prince Rhaegar, fully clad in expertly crafted armor, without breaking from the recoil. Donal's skills seemed promising, and Wright figured he could learn a thing or two from him. Without further delay, Wright made his way to the blacksmith's forge. With only a few days left until the tournament, the blacksmith's shop was busy, as many weapons and armor had been damaged during training. As the castle's vassal blacksmith, Donal did his work without charge, receiving a fixed monthly stipend from the lord. Outside, blacksmiths charged by the piece, but their work lacked guaranteed quality. Guided by a guard, Wright found Donal. Master Donal Noy, I'd like to ask you to forge 2 swords for me, one one-handed and one two-handed. Donal thought for a moment, and seeing that the swords wouldn't require much material for a child, took a long dagger and a measuring stick from the shelf. He measured Wright's height and arm length, using the dagger as a mock one-handed sword. After testing the weight, it seemed fairly appropriate. However, Donal quickly put the dagger back, seemingly reconsidering. But I can't give it to you just yet. It needs Lord Robert's approval first. Big Brother will definitely agree. There was no issue with the blacksmith, so Wright went to Robert to discuss the matter. Robert was surprised that a child not yet 3 years old wanted to use a steel sword to practice. Most 3-year-olds were still playing in the mud. Wright, I'll ask you 2 questions. Will you hurt yourself? Robert wasn't foolish. At least in his youth, he was diligent, had a wide range of friends, and was brave, traits that helped him lead armies to win the throne. He simply didn't like managing the politics of his lands. Once he became king, indulgence took over, and he lost all restraint, eventually becoming a corpulent man with debts in the millions of gold dragons. My toy sword has never hurt me, Wright replied confidently. Upon hearing the response, Robert asked his second question. Will your sword hurt someone else? He had heard from the maids that Wright had been using a wooden toy sword to beat up Garland, causing him to cry. Robert worried that if Wright had a real sword, he might not be able to control it and could injure Garland or others. Wright understood what Robert was concerned about and answered, A toy is a toy, and a steel sword is a weapon. A steel sword protects my family and friends. It only harms the enemies. After hearing this, Robert didn't want to say more. His young, precocious brother, now under 3 years old, had already started learning how to write common tongue characters. Despite his intelligence, Robert knew there were limits, and he was clow-lordy satisfied with this answer. I agree, but if you hurt someone, you'll have to go back to using a wooden sword, and you'll have to report it to Stannis. Wright was content. He went to his second brother and the blacksmith and received 2 iron weapons. In fact, Robert had overthought it. The weapons Wright received were, apart from the sword-like hilt, essentially just rectangular iron plates. There was no edge or point to them, just the proper weight. From that day on, everyone at the training grounds would laugh as Wright wielded his iron plates like they were toys. He followed various people, learning their martial skills. Though Prince Rhaegar was skilled, during every practice session with Arthur, Rhaegar was always the one to call for a stop. Arthur, too, could easily handle Ned. Oberyn's spear didn't particularly appeal to Wright. Robert's warhammer focused more on strength training, so Wright mostly worked on building his stamina. As more banners were raised in the castle, the number of visiting families increased. The houses Dondarrion, Cairn, and Swan, guarding the Stormlands and Dorne borders, had many soldiers and strongholds in difficult-to-attack locations. The houses Cafferin, Wensington, and Bowling, with deer on their banners, were houses that had been granted lands by House Baratheon generations ago for their service. Other houses with large cities and lands included the Selmy, Tarth, Penrose, Grandison, Buckler, Morrigan, Wild, Fell, Errol, Peasbury, and Mertens. The houses Hasty, Hurston, Horp, Kellington, Lonmouth, Musgood, Rogers, Staidman, Whitehead, Tudbury, Wagstaff, and Connington were knightly houses with strongholds or properties. Together with Wright's uncles, all the vassal houses of the Stormlands had arrived, waiting for the tournament to begin. Chapter 5. The Jousting Tournament at Storm's End. The day of the tournament had arrived. The guards led Wright and Renly into the arena, and the stands had increased in size since a few days ago. It seemed that Stannis wouldn't let an opportunity to make money slip by, and he was not one to miss a profitable venture. The area around the arena was lined with flags from noble families from all over. Outside the arena, competitors were polishing their weapons and armor, preparing their horses and adorning them with beautiful horse armor. Even if they couldn't win, they still needed to maintain their dignity. As the crowd continued to file into the stands, everyone was dressed in their finest attire. The tournament was not only a grand sporting event of the era, but also an important occasion for socializing among the nobility. Many families had brought their unmarried children, hoping to make new connections and possibly meet suitable matches. As members of the host family organizing the tournament, Wright and Renly had no worries about finding a seat. On the main stand, Prince Rhaegar and Lord Robert naturally took the highest chairs, chatting and drinking together. Representatives from 3 kingdoms, Dorne's Oberyn, Vale Albert, and the North's Eddard, each had a seat. The closest seats to the stand were occupied by Stannis, his 2 uncles, and several small noble houses. Wright naturally sat down in the empty seat next to Renly. As for Barristan and Arthur Dayne, who were part of the royal guards, they had duties to perform for the prince's honor and protection. They had to stand, as this was a formal occasion. From their conversation, it was clear that both would also participate in the upcoming competition. The tournament was divided into jousting, archery, and team events. The nobility cared most about jousting and team events, with archery being more of a spectacle. Those of higher status rarely participated in it, as it was seen as a way for lower-ranked knights and soldiers to make a name for themselves. Once enough participants had taken their seats, Robert raised his hand. Over 20 soldiers, clad in full armor and cloaked in coronets bearing the stag insignia, sounded several sharp notes on their horns, signaling the official start of the tournament. Due to the large number of participants, the tournament would last several days, starting with the preliminary rounds. The archery event was simple, allowing for multiple participants at once, and the winners were quickly determined. By the end of the first day, the champion had been decided. A squire from House Grandison won and was knighted on the spot by Robert. Wright, being so young, could only watch. However, unlike Renly, who would occasionally gasp in amazement or fall asleep, Wright wandered around the stands. When there were no matches, he would take a guard and go for a walk around the town, carrying a small notebook where he would jot down and sketch various observations, always keen to record information. The next day was the group competition finals. The day of the team tournament had arrived. The rules for the competition were that a commander would lead a group of knights or squires to represent their house. Traditionally, each match would feature 7 teams, though exceptions could be made if there weren't enough participants. Prince Rhaegar and Arthur Dayne did not compete, leaving the royal family's representation to Barristan Selmy. His squire, John Connington, represented House Connington in the tournament. The 7 teams that made it to the finals, clad in heavy armor and wielding weapons, stepped onto the field for the melee. The weaker and exhausted fighters were gradually knocked out. As the competition went on, a few were left standing. The Kingsguard Barristan Selmy first defeated John Connington, followed by a victory over Lord Leighton Hightower, the Lord of Oldtown. John Connington, whose skills were average, wasn't expected to win. He had entered the tournament to learn. Leighton, older than Barristan, had started to tire and couldn't keep up. Lord Randall Tarley of Horn Hill, who wasn't as skilled as some of the other champions, was better known for commanding armies than personal combat. By the time he faced Robert, all of his men had been eliminated, and he was at a disadvantage. In his fight with Robert, the difference in combat styles became evident. Robert's hammer strikes, which were devastating and unstoppable, were no match for the dexterous swordplay of Barristan. A powerful swing from Robert hit the armor, but his opponent skillfully evaded and parried. Exhausted, Robert found himself outwitted by Barristan, who placed his sword at Robert's throat, sending him out of the match. The final battle of the team tournament came down to Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard versus Prince Oberyn Martell of Dorne. Dorne, the only desert region of Westeros, had extreme heat where metal armor could burn the skin. As a result, Dornish men usually wore light leather armor, using metal only for vital areas. They also favored long spears, relying on agility and reach. While it was said that Aegon the Conqueror forged the Iron Throne from the swords of defeated enemies, the Dornishmen simply smiled at the notion of their long spears being converted into iron. Prince Oberyn, a young man in his 20s, was skilled in combat and loved to show off. Handsome with exotic features, he remained unmarried. After defeating opponents, he would twirl his spear to show off, drawing cheers from the crowd, especially the young women. Oberyn was also adept in poison-making, and his spear was always coated with venom. Though the venom wasn't deadly in the tournament, it was certainly painful and disorienting. He was often seen wearing red clothing, earning him the nickname Red Viper among the crowds. Oberyn danced around Barristan, using his weapon's reach to his advantage, thrusting it repeatedly. Barristan, weighed down by his heavy armor, began to tire. Facing this relentless assault, he switched his grip to one-handed to gain more flexibility, using his free hand for balance and defense. When a heavy thrust came, Barristan saw his opportunity. He struck from above, knocking the spearhead into the ground, then closed the distance quickly. Oberyn, unable to land a successful blow, tried to retreat and gain distance, but Barristan was already too close. With a swift motion, Barristan brought Oberyn to the ground. Barristan's team, representing the royal family, won the team tournament, the final stage of the jousting competition on the 3rd day. On the 3rd day of the tournament, the final stage of the jousting competition began. The participants, armed with wooden lances and shields, charged at each other on horseback. To participate, they had to be clad in full plate armor, something beyond the means of commoners. Only the nobles could afford such elaborate gear. Each knight wore armor and shields emblazoned with their family crests, representing the pride of their houses. The tournament was a display of noble honor, and each match was a matter of family prestige. Prince Oberyn Martell faced Prince Rhaegar Targaryen in the semi-finals. As everyone knew, Dornishmen favored the spear, and Oberyn was a master of it. Rhaegar, on the other hand, was more accustomed to wielding a sword. After several intense rounds, a light breeze kicked up some dust on the field, and in that moment, Oberyn made a fatal mistake. Rhaegar capitalized on it and knocked Oberyn off his horse. With that, Oberyn, shaking the dust from his eyes, took off his helmet and seemed to rub his eyes furiously, his defeat leaving him in 3rd place. The final match of the joust was between Arthur Dayne and Prince Rhaegar. The two battled fiercely for 13 rounds, breaking 12 lances in the process. However, on the 13th charge, Rhaegar's shield shattered, and Arthur was unseated. As expected, with the title sword of the morning, Arthur's skill in jousting couldn't compare to that of a true knight commander like Rhaegar. Rhaegar won the jousting tournament, claiming victory in the final contest. With the tournament concluded, many stayed in Storm's End to continue their business or host feasts for guests. Those with long journeys ahead began packing up, while traveling merchants dismantled their tents and prepared to move to the next location. Friends of Robert Baratheon were invited back to the castle for lavish meals and festivities. Bored with the revelry, Wright decided to find Stannis. In the study, he joined Stannis, Maester Cresson, and the two uncles, calculating the tournament's earnings. A small portion came from taxes on local and foreign merchant caravans, but the bulk of the revenue came from gambling. The Seven Kingdoms followed the faith of the Seven, which disapproved of gambling, illegitimacy, and, most seriously, incest and regicide. While incest and regicide were considered heinous crimes punishable by death or banishment to the Night's Watch, gambling and illegitimacy weren't taken as seriously. People might talk against such things, but their actions often told a different story. During these days, Wright had been documenting the various goods he had seen, preparing for future ventures. However, he was disappointed to find that this world seemed to have it all. Wine from Lys, exquisite tapestries and perfumes, glassware from Myr, silk from Volantis, and highly distilled brandy from Tyrosh. Westeros itself had soap, salt, and simple alloys. It seemed there was no way for a time traveler to profit here. As he watched his uncles report numbers and Maester Cresson calculate with pen and paper, Stannis tallied the total. They discussed how the unexpected defeat of the Red Viper by Prince Rhaegar had resulted in huge gambling earnings. They calculated how much the Red Viper would receive from his share and criticized his high demands. After deducting prize money and costs, they tallied the profits. Was this really going to be the way Wright made his fortune, as a gambling mogul in a medieval world? The poor's share was always a pittance, while the wealthy received their full due. He wondered if this path would lead him to be forever marked with disgrace, ridiculed by all. Chapter 6. Winds of Harrenhal Wright sat in the library of Storm's End, immersing himself in the systematic study of his house collection. Centuries ago, the Baratheons' ancestor had accompanied Aegon the Conqueror to Westeros' mainland land and taken Storm's End as their seat. Over the years, with several Baratheons serving as Hand of the King, the family's library had amassed an extensive collection, including books of lore and curiosities from Essos. Before his arrival in this world, his understanding of it had been limited to its tales of war and intrigue. Now, having crossed into this reality, he realized how tangible it all was. Farmers worked to grow food, millers ground grain into flour, and bakers transformed it into bread. Nothing sprang forth out of nowhere as mere names or numbers. If everything here followed a traceable path, then even gods, ancient magics, Valyrian steel, and dragons must adhere to their own sets of rules. To truly grasp this world, he couldn't rely solely on books or shows he had once consumed. It required study and hands-on experience. His days passed in a rhythm of reading, physical training, and exploring magic. Occasionally, he sought out Donal Noy, a blacksmith at Storm's End, to discuss forging techniques. Armed with modern knowledge, Wright's suggestions had turned Donal into the castle's finest smith, who now trained 5 apprentices of his own. Time flew by, and soon it was 281 AC, and the second day of the Harrenhal tournament. Robert and Stannis had also left to participate, leaving the role of acting castellan to their cousin, Andrew Estermont. Nearly every noble family in Westeros attended this 7-day extravaganza, leaving their younger children and spare heirs to oversee their households. Andrew, the only son of his branch of the family, had no choice but to stay behind as well, given the scarcity of capable family members on both sides. Wright, Renly, and Andrew dined together that evening when Maester Cresson approached, holding a raven scroll bearing the Baratheon seal. The letter was from Stannis. With the entire realm focused on Harrenhal, ravens were flying constantly, and it wasn't until late afternoon on the second day that news finally arrived. There's word that Aerys, spurred on by sycophants, attended the tournament despite his illness, Cresson read aloud. At the opening ceremony, the king announced the appointment of 15-year-old Jaime Lannister to the Kingsguard, granting him the White Cloak. As a member of the Kingsguard, Jaime forfeits lands, marriage, and children. That evening, a grand feast was held at Harrenhal. Tywin Lannister, having lost his carefully groomed heir, was reportedly pale with fury, his eyes bloodshot. 15 years old and already a Kingsguard? Jaime must be the youngest in history, Andrew marveled. Across the continent, many young knights likely envied and admired Jaime. There was, however, another who had been knighted at just 12 for exceptional bravery, though records of him had been deliberately erased, leaving few aware of his existence. But for the heads of noble houses and those skilled in the games of power, the more pressing matter was Tywin Lannister's loss of his carefully groomed heir. Though he still had a second son, this son was a dwarf, scorned by all of Westeros. Were it not for his birth into House Lannister, he might have been sold to a traveling circus in his infancy. For several days, news from the tournament dominated conversations. Archery and axe-throwing champions were knighted, others were eliminated, and Robert, after a year of intense training, cut down his competition with unparalleled ferocity. Betrothals between noble families were announced, and Eddard Stark was seen with a young lady, both having grown into adults. A mysterious knight known as the Laughing Tree of Greywater Watch emerged to defend the honor of the North. Even the king was unaware of this knight's identity. After a few victories, the Laughing Tree vanished without a trace. Robert wagered 10 golden dragons that, in his expert opinion, the knight was undoubtedly a woman. However, news of the 7th day's events failed to arrive on the 8th day. It wasn't until 3 days later that accounts began to filter in from other lords. In the final joust, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen defeated his opponent, Sir Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard. Amid the roaring cheers of the crowd, Rhaegar rode past his wife, Elia Martell, the mother of his 2 children. He placed the crown of blue roses, symbolizing the Queen of Love and Beauty, onto Lyanna Stark's lap. The arena, once filled with laughter and applause, fell into stunned silence. It was as if even the wind had stopped. This gesture carried immense weight. While there was no explicit law, it was an unspoken tradition across Westeros that a tourney winner's crown was an act of courtship, if the knight was single. For married knights, the crown was typically presented to the host's lady as a gesture of respect. Rhaegar, a married man, presenting the crown to Lyanna Stark, was nothing short of an affront to his wife's family. A week after the event, a raven arrived from Stannis with details privy only to those directly involved. Prince Oberyn Martell, as the brother of Rhaegar's wife, confronted the prince alongside Brandon Stark. Shortly after, Oberyn departed Harrenhal with his sister Elia, returning to King's Landing. Brandon, too, left Harrenhal that evening with his sister Lyanna. No one knows what was said during their private exchange. Robert outwardly dismissed the gesture, claiming it was merely Prince Rhaegar acknowledging his betrothed's beauty, something he had mentioned to the prince before. However, Eddard, knowing Robert's temperament, suspected that his friend wanted nothing more than to carve Rhaegar into pieces and feed him to the dogs. Adding to the tension, Tywin Lannister resigned as Hand of the King upon the court's return to the Red Keep. His replacement, Owen Merryweather, lacked the strength to rein in the king's increasingly erratic behavior. While Tywin could occasionally temper heiress madness, Owen's inability to exert similar control left the court vulnerable to chaos. After reading these missives, Wright, fully aware of the unfolding events, thought to himself, "The most significant turning point in Westeros' almost 300-year history has begun. At not yet 4 years old, I may not be able to alter the grand narrative, but I can try to prevent some smaller tragedies." His thoughts turned to the weirwood tree in the courtyard, and a chill ran down his spine. This was a world with figures like the three-eyed raven, capable of perceiving centuries past and future. To such a being, what was a reincarnated soul like himself? Friend or foe? If an enemy, the three-eyed raven, hidden somewhere beyond the wall, could monitor him at any time. Dealing with someone who essentially had a full map cheat was no simple matter. Fate is unchangeable, he mused. Yet my very presence proves that history can be altered. Even so, historical momentum is powerful. A butterfly's wings may not be enough to shift it. For now, as a 4-year-old Baratheon child, my actions must align with my house's interests. This world is full of cunning minds. No one would follow a mere cry of "Rise, peasants!" without weighing its benefits. He evaluated his family's strengths and weaknesses. Robert was unmatched in combat, charismatic like a true leader, and adept at recognizing and utilizing others' strengths, even turning enemies into allies. However, his lack of self-discipline was a glaring flaw. With Eddard and his foster father around to guide him, he could stay on course, but left unchecked, he would spiral out of control. Stannis had a knack for governance, but lacked exceptional talent and was socially inept, often fixating on minutiae. Renly was still young and impressionable. Perhaps he could be molded. The coming years would be critical. Robert's rebellion, set to unfold next year, and the 10 prosperous years that followed his ascension to the throne were vital for House Baratheon. Wright resolved to ensure these events unfolded as they should, careful not to let his presence disrupt the course of history too greatly. Chapter 7. The Shadow of War. In the year 282 AC, Robert's betrothed, Lyanna Stark, was abducted by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Enraged, Lyanna's brother, Brandon Stark, stormed into the Red Keep in King's Landing, demanding justice from the king and declaring that Rhaegar should come out and face him. Before the situation could be clarified, and considering that threatening the life of a prince was a grave crime, King Aerys ordered Brandon and his northern entourage arrested. As all of them were nobles, the king demanded their fathers come south to King's Landing to resolve the matter, keeping things relatively normal at first. However, once the fathers arrived, Aerys descended into madness. Without trials, he had them all executed. Those killed included the Lord of Winterfell and his heir, the Lord of Deepwood Motte and his heir, the heir to the Lord of the Vale, the Lord of Runestone and his heir, and the Lord of Seaguard. The news of these executions sent shockwaves throughout the 7 kingdoms. To kill great lords and their heirs without trial was an unprecedented abuse of power. Even the high-ranking lords barely had time to utter a word before being executed. Jon Arryn, who arrived later, narrowly escaped the same fate. When the king demanded that he surrender Robert and Eddard, the North, the Vale, and the Riverlands, regions long bound by ties of friendship and intermarriage, stood united in rebellion. Jon Arryn, as Robert and Eddard's foster father, raised his banners in open defiance of the king. The bannermen of the North, Vale, and Riverlands swiftly answered his call, assembling their armies. Meanwhile, the Reach and Dorne declared their support for the crown, while the Westerlands and the Iron Islands withheld any public declarations of loyalty. A war engulfing the entire continent was now unavoidable. Within the Vale, factions divided between royal loyalists and rebels. Under the leadership of Jon Arryn and Eddard Stark, the rebels defeated the royalist forces in Gulltown. Eddard then returned to the north to rally his bannermen. Robert raced back to Storm's End in the Stormlands, gathering his bannermen to join the rebellion. Across the Stormlands, banners were raised and men flocked to Storm's End. The castle and its surroundings became a hive of military activity, with tents sprawling across the fields. Within the castle walls, armored soldiers and commanders moved constantly, while the ringing of hammers from the blacksmiths repairing weapons and armor echoed day and night. Late at night, Robert, Stannis, and their bannermen concluded their war council. As the lords dispersed, Wright led a sleepy Renly into the room. Wright gestured for a private conversation, waiting until everyone else had left. The 4 Baratheon brothers, Robert, Stannis, Renly, and Wright, sat together. "What's on your mind, Wright?" Robert asked, his voice weary. He looked utterly exhausted. While he thrived in tournaments, commanding an army was an entirely different beast. As Lord of Storm's End, Robert was now forced to deal with matters of governance and strategy, roles he detested. He would rather lead charges into battle than plan them. Stannis, though more accustomed to administrative duties, was similarly overwhelmed. Managing the logistics of a full-scale war was far beyond anything he had ever faced before. "Do either of you know much about magic?" Wright asked, his expression unusually serious. Robert frowned. "I've heard that forging Valyrian steel requires magic, and they say Storm's End was built with it. But we've never seen anything truly magical here. Why are you asking about this now?" "Magic has long been lost," Stannis replied, his tone flat. I've seen a few so-called magical items before, but they were nothing more than cheap tricks, glowing lights, and strange sounds. Wright turned to Robert, his expression serious. Valyrian steel can be reforged once its techniques are understood. Blacksmiths in Qohor, for example, have mastered this skill, but creating Valyrian steel from ordinary iron requires magical forges and enchantments. Then he shifted his focus to Stannis. Magic draws its power from the world's magical energy. For centuries, this energy was in decline, and magic faded from the world. But now, the tides have turned. Magic is returning. As the flow of magical energy strengthens, there will be more people capable of wielding true magic. However, magical items are not indestructible. Powerful ones can be destroyed by equally potent magical forces, leaving behind only trinkets with minor enchantments. How can you be so sure? Both Robert and Stannis looked at him skeptically. If anyone else had said such things, Robert would have kicked them out of the room, and Stannis might have ordered the guards to dunk their head in water to bring them back to reality. But this was their younger brother, so they restrained themselves and listened. Wright stood up but found himself still shorter than the table. Climbing onto his chair, he unsheathed the small dagger at his waist and sliced his left palm. Blood immediately welled and dripped onto the table. "Are you mad?" Robert reacted instantly, reaching out to grab Wright's hand, but Wright raised his right hand to stop him, shouting, "Renly!" Renly, who had been struggling to stay awake as the conversation turned to magic, straightened at his brother's call. Watching Wright deliberately cut his own hand, Renly realized it was his moment to act. Stretching out his hands, palms hovering near Wright's injury, Renly concentrated. Slowly, a glowing orange light appeared between his hands. As he pushed the light toward Wright's bleeding palm, the wound began to close rapidly, the blood drying and the flesh knitting back together. Within moments, the cut had completely healed. Wright wiped away the remaining blood with his sleeve, revealing a pristine, unscarred hand. Robert and Stannis crowded around, inspecting Wright's hand, his sleeve, and then turning to examine Renly's hands as well. Their skepticism lingered. They were convinced it might be some sort of trick, but they could find no evidence of deception. "Is this truly magic?" Stannis asked, his voice filled with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Of course it's magic. This spell is called Healing Hands." Renly puffed out his chest, clearly expecting praise. Wright patted Renly's shoulder in approval. "Renly's magic is something I taught him. He has an innate talent for healing and alteration spells." Renly's Healing Hands ability was still at an apprentice level. While it allowed him to mend wounds, the process was only slow in comparison to more advanced spells. For minor injuries like a small cut, healing took mere moments. For more severe injuries like broken bones or deep lacerations, it would require considerably more time. When Wright first discovered that Renly possessed magical potential, he theorized that it was due to their bond as twins, which had passed the magical bloodline to him as well. Wright painstakingly transcribed several beginner-level magic books from memory, but Renly, who could barely read at the time, struggled to follow along. Patiently, Wright taught him to recognize letters and diagrams, guiding him step by step through the fundamentals of magical energy flow. After 2 months of effort, Renly successfully cast a simple light spell for the first time, an achievement that left him so ecstatic he couldn't sleep for 3 days. After further study, Wright confirmed that Renly's primary magical aptitude lay in restoration magic, with a secondary talent in alteration magic. He had reached the apprentice level in restoration, but was still a novice in alteration. As for destruction magic, Wright refrained from teaching it, fearing Renly might burn the house down. Additionally, Renly's magicka reserves were less than a tenth of Wright's. Unlike Wright, Renly didn't have a system to allocate points to magicka or skills. Everything he had achieved was through pure hard work and practice. Robert, still skeptical, turned to Wright. "You taught Renly? Do you know other spells?" Wright didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned around, conjuring a white orb of light in one hand and shooting it toward the ceiling. With his other hand, he formed a blue orb, which exploded in a shimmering cascade that surrounded him, forming a humanoid shield of glowing energy. Then, leaping onto the table, he extended both hands forward. A violent wind, laced with shards of ice, erupted from his palms, slamming into the walls. The gust extinguished the room's candles, leaving only the orb of light on the ceiling to illuminate the room with a brightness surpassing that of the candles. The icy wind was bone-chilling, rapidly covering the walls and furniture with a layer of frost. Wright turned and directed the stream toward the opposite wall, and Robert's armor mounted on a wooden mannequin. In moments, the armor, too, was encased in thick ice. Because they were in a closed space, the wind swirled chaotically, amplifying its ferocity. Ice shards flew through the air, cutting like blades. Renly climbed onto a chair, positioning himself in front of Robert and Stannis. He cast a protective barrier of restorative magic to shield them from the freezing onslaught. When the icy storm finally subsided, 2 walls and much of the furniture were coated in solid ice. The rest of the room was strewn with frost and ice shards, transformed into a world of white. Wright turned back to his brothers, raising his hands. A red flame ignited in his left palm, while blue electricity crackled in his right. "This is my magic." Robert and Stannis stared in astonishment at the transformed room. At last, they fully accepted that their younger brothers were indeed magic users. "Can Stannis and I learn magic too?" Robert asked cautiously, his tone hopeful. Seeing the eager expressions on their faces, Wright sighed inwardly. Magicka was either present or absent. It couldn't be forced. He could only explain gently. "I'm sorry. Renly and I are both in the exploratory stage of our magic. Historically, only those born with an affinity for magic could become mages through study. Even then, magical talent could skip generations. Unfortunately, neither of you has magicka within you. Magic is a technique, but magicka is the source that fuels it. Imagine magicka as a tree. A clever person can chop the tree into firewood to provide warmth. Magic works similarly. If someone can sense magicka and has the intellect to harness it, they can develop ways to cast spells. Wright couldn't reveal that his knowledge of magic came from another world, but since this one did have a real source of magicka, he fabricated a plausible explanation. Though disappointed, Robert and Stannis seemed to accept the situation. Suddenly, Robert burst into laughter. "In our generation, 2 out of 4 Baratheons are magic users. This proves that the Baratheon bloodline carries the potential for magical talent. Even if Stannis and I lack it, that doesn't mean our descendants won't have it. The more children we have, the higher the chance of producing another mage." Wright was stunned. Could Robert's infamous abundance of bastards later in life stem from this belief? Chapter 8. Strategy. As Wright watched Robert and Stannis shake off their disappointment, he turned to the critical topic at hand, ensuring history followed its original trajectory. Any deviations, while inevitable, must not derail the grand course of events. As of today, only the 4 of us know about Renly's and my magic. I haven't even told Maester Cresson. The reason Renly and I revealed our abilities was first to prove our intelligence, and second, to demonstrate that we can defend ourselves. Now, brothers, what do you plan to do about the current situation? Robert leaned forward. Right now, Doran Martell in the south and House Tyrell in the west have both declared their support for the king. We're caught between 2 enemies. The northern rebels who want to overthrow the king have been pinned down. Either we hold our position here to distract Dorne and the Reach, or we abandon Storm's End and march north. Our bannermen are debating the options, Stannis interjected. The Reach can mobilize an army several times our size, and we cannot underestimate the Dornish forces. A direct offensive would likely fail. Our best option is to play defense and wait for northern reinforcements. But King's Landing blocks their path, and if we abandon the Stormlands, Dorne and the Reach will ravage our lands. This is our home. Such devastation would shatter morale, and we could even face defections. Wright turned to Robert. "Brother, have you ever truly considered what this rebellion is about?" Robert answered without hesitation. "What else?" "To overthrow that mad king, kill Rhaegar, and rescue my betrothed." Stannis added. And then? After the king and the prince are dead, who will sit the Iron Throne? Neither Robert nor the Northern Lords had thought much about the aftermath. Their focus had been solely on defeating the king. For a moment, Robert was silent, unable to provide an answer. Stannis broke the silence. By law, after the Mad King's death, Rhaegar would inherit the throne. But this rebellion aims to overthrow the Targaryens entirely. That leaves the next in line as Rhaegar's son, followed by Prince Viserys. Wright spoke up. Don't forget, brothers, our family has intermarried with the Targaryens many times. Our grandmother, Princess Raelle, was of House Targaryen. If something catastrophic happens, Robert has a legitimate claim to the throne. Do you really want to put the Mad King's descendants on the throne and wait for them to grow up, only to seek revenge on us? That's true, Stannis agreed. In that case, Robert is the most suitable candidate for the Iron Throne. His excitement grew at the prospect of his elder brother ruling the Seven Kingdoms. Stannis continued, the Mad King is incompetent and, increasingly, tyrannical. Many lords across the realm are already on the brink of revolt. If Robert rallies the banners under the banner of ending the Mad King's tyranny, it will unite the lords and give the rebellion a clear purpose. With a blood claim to the throne and the strength to lead, Robert ascending as king can galvanize the rebel cause. You are the one, brother. Robert's face flushed red as he listened. Though he remained outwardly calm, his inner turmoil was palpable. Since this rebellion is in my name, I can't stay here to fend off Dorne and the Reach while leaving the northern forces to attack King's Landing alone. I must head north as soon as possible to join the rebel army and unite our forces for the assault on the capital. Robert analyzed the situation while Renly nodded along, though it was unclear if he truly understood the discussion. Stannis added, First, we need to purge loyalists to the crown within our own lands and unite the Stormlands under one banner. I'll handle that myself. Some of our bannermen have been dragging their feet and ignoring my summons. They're clearly disloyal, but dealing with them won't be hard, Robert assured confidently. Stannis continued, Second, we must consider the Reach, which has the largest army. Brother, do you know which of their commanders can actually fight? The lot of them? Good at counting coins, useless at fighting. Except for Randall Tarly, the rest are cowards, Robert scoffed. The Tyrells were just stewards for the gardeners, who they betrayed to seize the title of High Lords. More than half the bannermen in the Reach don't respect them. Every war they fight is full of tricks, half-hearted effort, and no real commitment. Lady Olenna Tyrell runs their house's affairs. Her son, Mace Tyrell, is just a wealthy fool, Stannis added. After a moment's thought, Robert said, Then here's the plan. I'll send Lady Olenna a letter, praising their loyalty to the crown while explaining that the rebellion is a matter of survival, not treason. I'll propose a staged battle at an agreed-upon location where we'll feign defeat and retreat. This way, they can report to their bannermen that they've upheld their duties without risking unnecessary bloodshed. Stannis nodded. We can also suggest they focus on besieging Storm's End without pillaging the Stormlands towns. This plan, devised by Robert and Stannis, heavily favored their own side. Wright interjected, But will the Tyrells agree to this? Stannis replied, Lady Olenna is no fool. This approach lets them demonstrate loyalty to the crown without significant losses. The letter will also carry a veiled threat. If it comes to real fighting, both the Reach and the Stormlands will be left in ruins. They'll fear retribution. The Tyrells don't hold absolute control over the Reach. Most of their bannermen aren't keen on war. Some even want the Mad King dead. The people of the Reach have no strong ties to the crown and are only looking to profit from the chaos. That's why the letter must go to Lady Olenna, not Mace. Stannis, draft the letter in my name and arrange a meeting with their envoys. If the plan works, I'll lead the Stormlands' main forces north as soon as possible. If not, we'll come up with something else, Robert ordered. He wasn't one for flowery language, so he delegated the task to his younger brother. Oh, and have the envoy tell them to bring plenty of supplies for the siege. Whether it lasts a day or a year, it's all the same to us. Ha! Wright cautioned. Stannis, you'll need to hold Storm's End no matter what. If Robert is to be king, his future seat of power must remain unbroken. Losing it would devastate morale. Stannis nodded resolutely. I'll have a small garrison, but Storm's End is nearly impregnable. I'll stockpile food, medicine, and whatever else is needed to withstand a long siege. Robert added, Renly and Wright's magic must remain a secret for now. Only use it in critical moments, like saving gravely injured leaders. Once we've dealt with the north and west, that leaves the south, Dorne. Stannis said, I'm not too worried about Dorne. For decades, they've never fielded an army, always offering verbal support. Still, no one can guarantee they won't send troops this time. And with the rebellion aimed at overthrowing the king, their sister is the wife of Prince Rhaegar, Robert replied, taking a drink and rubbing his temples. He felt like today was the day he had used his brain the most in his entire life. Stannis responded, We should write a letter to Prince Doran Martell in my name, acknowledging their loyalty to the crown, but explaining that it was Rhaegar who betrayed his marriage, and the Mad King who slaughtered the nobles. Once the rebels capture King's Landing, the goal will be to overthrow the crown and ensure the safety of his sister and her children. If they don't send troops, that's ideal. At the very least, we want them to join forces with the Reach at Storm's End. Isn't that guarantee enough? Robert asked. Wright, looking at the two of them, took over. That's why I, as Robert's fourth brother, will personally go to Dorne as a hostage. They'll kill you first as a sacrifice, Robert shouted angrily. Stannis also agreed. Robert needs to head north, while I'll defend Storm's End. The best scenario is Dorne does not intervene. The second best is Dorne agrees to our terms and only besieges Storm's End, which would put even more pressure on me. The worst case is if Dorne and the Reach ignore Storm's End and directly support the crown. In that case, the neutral Westerlands will inevitably side with the Loyalists. With the largest army in the Riverlands, the richest Westerlands, Dorne's long-prepared forces, and the Loyalists within the northern armies, who can your rebellion possibly stand against? Wright countered, Until the war's outcome is certain, Dorne will not harm me. And with my magic, I have a good measure of safety. In the original story, Dorne did send 10,000 troops to support the crown, but the real fear was the unpredictability. If Robert were to lose, it could throw everything into chaos. Thus, the key was to create a significant gap in forces between the two sides. Both Robert and Stannis weren't fools. With a few words from Wright, they quickly agreed on the plan. Robert looked at the three of them for a while, then sighed. My good brothers. Thus, their strategy was set. Robert would quickly clear out the Loyalists in the Stormlands and, after a feigned defeat against the Reach, lead the main army north to join forces with the northern armies. Stannis would gather supplies and hold Storm's End until the northern forces arrived. Renly would assist in treating the severely wounded. Wright would head to Dorne to stabilize the situation. Robert pulled the hands of his brothers together, and they all grasped each other firmly. Our family's words, he said. The four brothers shouted in unison, Ours is the fury! With that, the Baratheon brothers began their ascent to power. Chapter 9. Dorne. Soon after, Robert led his army to the ruins of Summerhall, where he decisively defeated 3 pro-loyalist families in his territory, significantly boosting morale. Instead of executing the defeated traitors, Robert brought them back to Storm's End, where he celebrated with wine and revelry. As the eldest brother, Robert's leadership shone, and from that moment on, the Stormlands were united as one. A raven from the Reach had already returned, bearing only the words, Ashford, written on it. Robert immediately understood that House Tyrell had agreed to the terms. He quickly led his main army into action, leaving 1,000 men to defend Storm's End. To be cautious, Robert sent out scouts and discovered that the forces of the Reach had gathered at the Cider Hall. Even the most battle-hardened troops, led by the capable Randall Tarly, were stationed only near the cider hall, with the forces stationed at Ashford being solely composed of soldiers from the local lord's house, the Senford family. Robert sent a small force to engage House Ashford in battle, with both sides exchanging blows. As soon as reinforcements from the Reach arrived, Robert's army feigned retreat, abandoning some flags, weapons, and armor as they fled, and quickly led the main force northward. The Reach army, led by Lord Randall Tarly, bypassed other towns in the Stormlands and advanced directly toward Storm's End, the stronghold of the rebel leader Robert. Faced with the seemingly impregnable walls of Storm's End, Lord Tarly ordered a siege. His soldiers set up camp outside the castle, cooking and preparing food, while the nobles were well fed with wine and meat. A raven was sent to King Aerys II, reporting that Robert had been defeated and was fleeing north, while they laid siege to Storm's End. The king was overjoyed and sent generous rewards of wine to the troops. Meanwhile, Dorne's raven had also returned. Prince Doran Martell replied that House Martell would join forces with the Reach, but the other Dornish lords and their vassals were beyond his control. The Martells, like the Tyrells, have a loose control over theirs vassals. Doran also expressed his wish for Renly and Wright to visit Sunspear. After a discussion among the Baratheon brothers, Wright assured them that even if Dorne turned against them, he and Renly would have the means to escape. With that, Robert agreed to Dorne's request and sent 20 loyal guards to escort Wright and Renald by ship to Sunspear. Each of the Baratheons had their own duties to attend to. Dorne, with its unique desert landscape, was very different from the rest of Westeros. While the majority of Dornish people lived in the southwestern wetter regions near rivers and coastal areas, Dorne also had several cities and fortresses. The capital, Sunspear, was a city built on a small peninsula, with several tall towers rising above the sea, a striking sight from afar. The Iron Throne had never fully conquered Dorne. Over 200 years ago, the Targaryens, riding dragons, burned nearly every major city in Dorne. Despite heavy losses, the Dornish refused to yield, and this defiance had become a point of pride for them. Following this, peace was achieved through marriage alliances. Dorne had nominally submitted to the Iron Throne, but in practice, it retained autonomy. As a result, Martells were titled princes rather than lords, unlike the leaders of other regions. Because Dorne was separated from the rest of Westeros by a vast desert, Dornish people had less interaction with other regions, which allowed them to preserve many traditions from their ancestors, the Rhoynar people of the eastern continent. For example, both men and women in Dorne were known for their fiery and open personalities. Women trained in combat and fought alongside men on the battlefield, and both genders had equal inheritance rights. The ship slowly approached the port of Sunspear. Sunspear, perched on a small rocky peninsula, had its castle surrounded by the sea on 3 sides. The tall towers of the castle could be seen from a great distance. Like Storm's End, Sunspear was primarily a military stronghold rather than a commercial hub, and the port was small, adequate only for daily life and transportation needs. After Renly, Wright, and their guards disembarked, the prince's guards were already waiting at the port to welcome them. They passed through the Shadow City, a district outside the city walls where commoners ran shops, similar to the markets of Storm's End. However, Sunspear's walls were unlike those of any other city. They consisted of 3 layers, each winding and curving through the residential areas, making the city feel like a labyrinth. Following the guards into the inner city, they reached the throne hall. Inside, stained glass windows filled the space with vibrant colors. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, stood 2 thrones, one with the golden spear emblem of House Martell and the other with the red sun emblem, symbolizing the union of the 2 houses. The golden spear had once been the Martell family's sigil, while the red sun was the emblem of Queen Nymeria of the Rhoynar, who had fled from the Valyrian conquest over 1,000 years ago. She had led her people to Dorne and married into House Martell. Many of Dorne's customs were brought by her people, including the tradition of women warriors proudly bearing the red sun emblem. In the future, the daughter of House Stark would have a direwolf named Nymeria. "Your Highness, good afternoon. I came to Dorne for travel, and thus asked my brother Robert to arrange this," Renly said, delivering the prepared words. After the greeting, Renly's guards handed over the letter sealed with Robert's seal and gifts sent by Robert to the prince's guards. On the surface, Wright and Renly were in Dorne for a visit, and to ensure their stay was well managed, Robert had also sent a gift of several thousand gold dragons. Since the war's end was uncertain, and to avoid future complications, Robert hoped the gifts would help temper any potential anger should things take an unexpected turn. After reading the letter, Prince Doran Martell glanced at Wright and Renly. He had little to say to the two young boys, knowing the real situation between them. Without further discussion, he instructed his steward, Licasso, to show Wright and Renly to their rooms and ordered the guards to prevent the boys and their attendants from leaving the castle grounds. The castle was vast, and the steward assigned 5 guest rooms in the guest wing. Wright and Renly shared a large room which had a breeze flowing through it from both the north and south, with a curtain of beads separating the space. The ceiling was adorned with intricate glass carvings, and the furniture and carpets displayed traditional Dornish patterns. The large garden outside featured palm and coconut trees, giving the space an exotic feel. As the guards arranged their belongings, the two boys wandered through the garden. Wright told Renly that the coconuts on the trees, as big as their heads, were delicious. This was Renly's first time seeing such large fruits. Tempted by the sight, he couldn't resist. Seeing no one around, he picked up a small stone from the garden and threw it at one of the coconuts. "You two are already smashing my coconuts?" came a voice from nearby. 3 young girls approached. The oldest appeared to be around 10, while the younger 2 seemed to be about Renly and Wright's age. Renly quickly bowed and said, "Good afternoon, ladies." It was a bit awkward being caught trying to smash coconuts in someone else's garden, especially as a noble. Wright, with his thick skin, immediately changed the subject. "This coconut looks great, but why hasn't it made it to Storm's End?" The oldest girl responded in a tone that suggested she was speaking to someone guilty. "We Dorne folk can barely feed ourselves, let alone have extra to sell." "May I ask your names?" Renly inquired, realizing the hostility in the air but not daring to speak further. Wright, on the other hand, wasn't fazed by the girl's attitude and took the lead. "I'm Obara Sand," the oldest girl said. "This is my sister Nymeria Sand, and this is Tyene Sand. Our father is Prince Oberyn." Wright's memory kicked in. These were the future Sand Snakes, Oberyn Martell's infamous bastard daughters. As the brother of Dorne's ruler, Oberyn had money and freedom. He spent his life traveling, fighting, and indulging in many lovers without ever marrying. His numerous bastard daughters, raised like his legitimate children, were known as the Sand Snakes, infamous for their deadly skills in poison and stealth. But for now, they were just young girls. Wright smiled at them. "I'm Wright, and this is my twin brother, Renly." The girls had overheard their uncle, Prince Doran, discussing the 2 hostages from Storm's End, and had come to take a look at the twins. While twins were not rare in many parts of the world, they were uncommon in Dorne, making this a curious sight. The 3 girls exchanged glances, trying to spot any differences between the 2 brothers. Wright, in turn, took the opportunity to observe them. The eldest, Obara, had brown hair, close-set eyes, and a strong build. Nymeria, the second, had black hair and eyes, and already, at such a young age, her beauty was evident. She was named after the legendary warrior queen Nymeria, reflecting the high regard Dorne held for her. The youngest, Tyene, had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a sweet appearance. For Wright, even though the girls were older, they were still just children, and given his experiences across 2 lifetimes, he had little trouble connecting with them. With a few stories, jokes, and an easygoing attitude, he broke the tension, making Renly and the girls laugh together, easing the awkwardness. Chapter 10. Prince Doran. There were stone chairs scattered around the garden. Wright, accompanied by a few children, sat by a pool and chatted. He also learned that Prince Doran's children lived in another city, the Water Gardens, while they resided in Sunspear. After a while, Prince Doran appeared. When the three little girls saw their uncle coming, they quickly ran off, afraid that he would find out they had been eavesdropping. Dorne watched as the girls ran off without even greeting him. It was clear they had been caught. "You two, don't leave the garden. Maester Duncan will come and teach you how to read." "Can we go to the library?" Wright asked. "You two can read?" Dorne was a bit surprised. "I can read. Renly is still learning," Wright replied. "I'll allow you to visit the library. I've heard of the early wisdom of the fourth son of the Baratheon family. I'll have the guards briefed," Dorne agreed, before turning to leave. Seeing Dorne about to walk away, and considering his own diplomatic mission, Wright quickly found a topic to discuss. "These coconuts are huge. Why don't you sell them to the north?" Dorne was the southernmost region of the continent, and when people here referred to the north, they meant the rest of the continent. "Coconuts are hard to grow. Grow them in large quantities, fertilize them, and remove the pests," Wright suggested. "We've tried, but the trees don't bear fruit." Wright pretended to think for a moment. "Just like how men and women need to be together to have children, trees need both male and female trees to bear fruit." "Do you know all this?" Dorne squinted and smiled at Wright. "I read a lot of books," Wright said without changing his expression. "I've read countless books, but I've never come across any that mention such things," Dorne said, trying to impress the child. Wright recalled that Doran, who had gout and difficulty moving, was also a diligent ruler. His reading habits were certainly understandable. The longer Wright lived in this world, the more he began to forget his previous life, as he was not the type to keep a thatchring. Maesters doesn't prioritize agriculture, as it is considered the work of lower classes. Naturally, there are no books on the subject. In the Stormlands, we don't have many places to grow food, so when we don't have enough crops, we have to buy from elsewhere. That's why we have these books at home. Wright casually invented a half-true, half-false explanation. It was true that Maester didn't prioritize agriculture, but the part about having books at home was a lie. "You can try planting a few trees. Spread the pollen from one tree onto the flowers of another," Dorne said, after listening quietly. After a pause, Dorne added, "I have other matters to attend to," and left. Even if the suggestion was correct, he could not acknowledge it in front of a child. As for whether he would try planting coconuts, Wright didn't care. What mattered was leaving a smart, engaging impression in front of Dorne's highest leader. Prince Doran's political skills were among the best on the entire continent. He relied solely on open strategies and always adhered to principles, with a remarkable ability to bide his time, often setting up intricate plans that required decades to unfold. However, luck was never on his side. Afterward, the three young girls frequently visited Wright and Renly. Princess Arianne Martell, Prince Doran's daughter, also came along with the three sisters several times. Renly was very smart, having received a noble education from a young age, and was very polite when speaking to others. Wright, as usual, was well-spoken. The girls were primarily visiting Wright, enjoying the tales and jokes he told. Even a butterfly could be turned into an interesting story. Listening to Wright's stories became their favorite pastime. Sitting by the garden pond, eating oranges, and listening to stories, each time Nymeria and Tyene would squish together next to Wright, trying to hear the stories more clearly. The fun times made the days fly by. They also practiced fighting. The eldest sister, Obara, was already 10 name days old. The second sister, Nymeria, was 8 name days old, and the youngest, Tyene, was 6 name days old. Princess Arianne was also 9 name days old, all older than Wright. Except for a few families, every Dornish person was taught to wield a spear. Additionally, everyone trained with either a short weapon or a secondary weapon. The eldest sister was adept with a whip, the second sister, Nymeria, with throwing knives, the youngest, Tyene, with a dagger, and Princess Arianne wielded a short spear. Wright, aided by the gaming system, learned quickly with both one-handed and two-handed weapons, as well as shields. He could now spar with the girls in the garden, using spears, whips, daggers, and throwing knives. When it came to unarmed combat, he could easily defeat 2 girls at once. Renly only began learning how to fight after arriving in Dorne. Before that, he had only watched others train, but had never seen a real battlefield. His experiences were limited to training sessions with controlled strikes or duels in tournaments where opponents avoided vital areas, all adhering to knightly etiquette. But the Obara sisters and Princess Arianne of Dorne didn't care about such formalities. Every strike aimed either at vital points or low blows. If one defended their lower body, the next strike would come to the face or neck. If one protected their upper body, they would be hit so hard that they'd writhe on the ground in pain. And Wright couldn't use magic for defense. His fight skills were no match for them, and after every training session, he had to lie down in exhaustion, harboring much frustration. Prince Doran occasionally visited the guest hall. At first, he guided the group in martial arts, but soon he began discussing news from the north with Wright. Each visit grew longer. He no longer treated Wright like a child and started talking about the war situation, likely thinking of him as a teen in his 5 and 10 name days. Wright appreciated this attitude from Doran. He often emphasized the 4-region alliance and excluded House Lannister of the Westerlands, because he didn't know if the Lannisters would do the same thing again, and whether the two princes would vent their anger on himself and Renly. While Wright and Renly did not face the ravages of war in Dorne, the conflict in the north had begun to escalate. After Robert's feigned defeat and the lead of his main forces northward, they quickly passed through the Riverlands, thus avoiding the battle at the Bells that had originally been planned to intercept Robert. The combined forces of the north, the Vale, and the Riverlands finally united, choosing Robert as their king and marching south to attack King's Landing. The Royalist and rebel forces finally met at the Trident. Neither side had been worn down by the Battle of the Bells, and their numbers were intact. However, Dorne's forces, besieging Storm's End, had only Oberyn Martell and a small contingent of knights to offer support. This imbalance tilted the scales significantly in favor of Robert's side during the Battle of the Trident. The Royalist forces only mustered 35,000 men, while the rebel forces nearly 40,000. During the Battle of the Trident, the commanders of both armies faced off one-on-one. Prince Rhaegar was killed by Robert, while the rebel commander Jon Connington was slain by Eddard Stark. The Kingsguard member Lewin Martell was killed by Sir Lyn Corbray. Upon learning the news, Wright wrote back to Robert, asking him to locate Rhaegar's body and bury it where he fell, with a gravestone inscribed with his deeds. He urged Robert to have the monument erected in his name to soothe the hearts of the neutral factions and the Royalists. The Royalist forces scattered in retreat toward King's Landing, while Robert, leading the rebels, continued their march south. The Ironborn pirates were also beginning to stir. Outside Storm's End, House Hightower's fleet surrounded the sea, while the army joined forces with Dorne's troops, launching several attacks that were repelled by Stannis. The rebellion's leaders hadn't even taken their own home yet, and there was nothing that could be done to fulfill King Aerys's orders to provide support for King's Landing. The news reached Dorne. Prince Lewin Martell had died in battle. He was the uncle of Doran and Oberyn. Afterward, Prince Doran no longer visited Wright. He had the guards bring the news instead, as they were of equal noble rank, and there was no need to sever ties completely yet. One day, during unarmed combat training, the 4 girls insisted on a 1-on-4 match with Wright. At first, it went well, but as the sparring continued, something felt off. The girls' expressions became more vicious, and their strikes grew increasingly forceful as they surrounded him. Wright, unable to use magic, started to struggle and could no longer defend himself. In the end, he had to grab one of the girls from behind to use her as a shield. He fell to the ground, leaving his back and one side exposed. The 3 other girls pinned him down and continued to hit him. Fortunately, their strength wasn't great due to their age. He had only scraped his head against the ground, bleeding, which looked worse than it was, just a superficial wound. Normally, such minor injuries wouldn't be counted, but this was the first time Renly had seen Wright covered in blood, and he froze in place, terrified. "You're going to die! Your brother killed Prince Lewin! Liar! Despicable Northerners!" the girls shouted angrily. Wright understood why they were upset, and being in someone else's home, he didn't fight back. Eventually, they ran out of energy. "We'd love to kill you and Renly, but we can't. Princess Ariane said with a face full of rage. "We've both lost people, but they died on the battlefield, with honor," Wright shouted, lying on the ground. He sat up and released the girl he'd been using as a shield, Nymeria. Westeros had been at war for thousands of years, and countless houses had fought one another. If every death required vengeance, then the entire continent would be wiped out. So the code of knightly honor had gradually included this. Both sides fight for their liege lords, and dying on the battlefield at the hands of the enemy is honorable, with no personal vendettas involved, so no revenge should be sought. Princess Ariane and the eldest sister Obara left. Nymeria and Tyene, who were closest in age to Wright, had not gotten up yet. They watched their sisters walk away and then looked at Wright, covered in blood. The two girls sat down and began to cry. "War is cruel, and no one wishes to start it. I hope you'll talk to your sisters and help them understand the reasons behind this war," Wright said as he went inside to fetch some oranges. After a while, when the girls had cried themselves out, he wiped their tears with his sleeve and peeled the oranges, handing one to each of them. After the oranges were eaten, the girls stood up, wiped their tears, and slowly walked out of the garden, still shuddering as they went. Wright dragged the stunned Renly inside to wash their faces. Since there was no immediate danger to his life, Wright decided to keep the injuries visible for the time being, planning to use healing magic in a couple of days. Soon after, the guards brought medicine for the wounds. The next day, Dorne visited to check on him. The princess and Obara never came again. Only Nymeria and Tyene occasionally came with fruit, sitting by the garden pond, eating oranges, and listening to Wright's stories. But this time, they only listened quietly. There was no laughter.